The information contained in this podcast is an expression of opinion and does not constitute investment advice. This is the Gold Money Podcast with Andy Duncan, keeping you up to date with expert opinion on precious metals and the markets.
Today I'm speaking to James Turk, chairman of Gold Money, about a study he carried out with Juan Castañeda at the University of Buckingham on the world's above-ground supply of gold. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Andy.
Now, this study is freely available on the goldmoney.com website. What prompted you to carry it out?
There's so much misunderstanding about gold, what gold really is. I thought that it might make sense to do a study on gold's above-ground stock. Because, at the end of the day, gold is money. And if you don't understand why gold is money, if you don't analyze, gold is money, you're going to go off in the wrong direction. So I thought this study would be helpful for people to look at gold from the way that it really is, what it always has been. In Congress, testimony before Congress back in the early 1900s, about 100 years ago, J.P. Morgan said that gold is money, nothing else. And what he said 100 years ago still applies today. But people have sort of lost sight of that.
In the study itself, there is a discrepancy between official figures and what you think the figures are. What is the size of the above-ground stock of gold, in your opinion, and how does this differ from the official numbers?
Yeah, the official numbers say are about 171,000 as at the end of December 2011. And mine are about 155,000, which is 16,000 less, which is just about 10% of the gold stock. It's overestimated in the official numbers. And at prices of around $1,700, that's about $800 billion difference between the two numbers. The reason for the overstock or the overestimate of the gold stock, they're basically, two. First of all, in the official estimate, the 1492, when Columbus discovered the Americas, the estimate that they use for the above-ground gold stock is way too high. And the second reason is that they've estimated too much production from 1492 to the present. 1492 is an ideal time to begin a detailed, accurate study of the above-ground gold stock because more formal record-keeping began at 1492, first with the Spaniards and the gold they brought back from the Americas, and then just generally, governments and companies and individual analyses of the gold stock. It was able to keep, more formal record keeping, from that moment in time on. So depending on what number you begin with in 1492 as the above ground gold stock could have an impact on what number you end up with as the total above ground gold stock today. And the official number starts with an estimate of 1492 that's far too high compared to all of the various best judgments as to what the gold stock was in that period of time.
If we look at writers like Mises and various other writers in the Austrian school, they say that the amount of money is strange because it doesn't actually matter what it is, what the actual amount is. And when questioned by Ron Paul, Ben Bernanke has described gold as just another financial asset. So what's the major point that people should get from the study?
Bernanke said gold was just a tradition. It's really not. Gold is money. It was money that was chosen by the market, thousands of years ago, just like silver was chosen by the market thousands of years ago. Money is something that arises from the market. It doesn't arise from government edict or government dictate, although governments would have you believe that, they're the ones that are responsible for money and all money comes from them. Gold is a free market money. And, in order to look at it, we really have to understand it. It is money, that it's not an investment. When you have a portfolio, you have two basic categories of assets within the portfolio. You've got investments and you've got money or liquidity. Some people say stocks and cash, but you obviously have much more in a portfolio than just stocks. You've got bonds, other assets, things of that nature. The thing is that gold is not an investment. It doesn't have a balance sheet, doesn't have a management team, doesn't have a PE ratio, and more importantly, it doesn't generate cash flow. So Warren Buffett is right when he says that gold is not an investment. It's not an investment, but Warren Buffett only goes halfway. He should have said what it really is. Gold is money. And the reason why it's money is that it preserves purchasing power over long periods of time, which is one of the key functions of money. Another key function of money is that gold is very useful for economic calculation. The other aspect of money is that, does gold circulate as currency? Well, it doesn't circulate as currency so much in the West. It circulates as currency in places like Turkey and Vietnam and other parts of the world. But I think once again, that third function of gold circulating, or third function of money, gold circulating as currency, will happen at some point in time in the future. But if you believe that gold is an investment, you're going to come up with the wrong conclusions because you're going to be comparing gold to the wrong things. You can't compare gold to a cash generating or cash flow generating asset because gold doesn't generate cash flow. If the price of gold rises, it's not because you're making money. The price of gold rises is because currency is being debased. So what that means is that wealth has already been created by somebody. It's held in the form of a national currency. And when the gold price rises, the wealth is moving, let's call it purchasing power, is moving from the hands of people who own national currency to the hands of people who own gold. So gold's not really creating wealth. It's not an investment. Gold is basically redistributing wealth when its price rises from national currencies to the people who own gold.
The thing when you say gold is money is that since 1971, we've had a pure fiat currency system based mostly upon a paper dollar. And most people, if you're in the street, would say that that's going to exist for the next 1,000 years. So why is it important that people understand that gold really is true money?
Yeah, first of all, just because governments say that gold has been demonetized, it doesn't necessarily make it so. We have to distinguish between the words money and currency. We use these words interchangeably, but they're two entirely different things. I like to describe money as Mises did. He called it a mental tool. And in that sense, it's sort of like the ability to speak. That's also a mental tool. When we speak, we convey our thoughts. When we spend money, when we calculate in terms of money, we're making assessments about our own subjective judgments of value. Currency is different in the sense that it's the physical representation of what we use when we're using this mental tool we call money. And there are various different types of currency. So what happened in 1971 is, gold wasn't demonetized. It was basically decurrencyized, if, there's a word like that. It was basically stopped from any kind of relation to the U.S. dollar. But that didn't stop gold from being money, even though it was no longer circulating as currency. And the reason why we can see this is going back to the gold stock study. I have a chart in there of crude oil prices from 1950 to the present. And you can see in that chart how the price of crude oil is rising in terms of the U.S. dollar, British pound, and the euro. But the price of crude oil in terms of gold is exact same as where it was 60 years ago. And this is also a significant part of the study, Andy, and one of the reasons why it's important is that, when we talk about the dollar or the euro or any of the currencies, we talk about M1, M2, M3. These are central bank measures of the amount or quantity of dollars that are in circulation. M1 is a narrow definition, M2 is a little bit broader, and then M3 is the broadest definition of currency or of dollars or any other currency. Basically, M3 would be all of the dollars that are in circulation. Well, gold has an M3 as well. It's all of the gold that exists, and that's what the Aboveground gold stock study aimed to show. It shows that there's 155,000 metric tons of gold. That's gold M3. But the important part of the study is that it shows that the Aboveground gold stock grows at approximately 1.8% per annum year after year after year. And that number is important. It's important because that's approximately equal to world population growth and approximately equal to new wealth creation. So you have this consistency in the new supply of gold, the additions annually to gold's M3 from new mining production and world population growth. If you compare those numbers to the growth in dollars, for example, which we do which I've done in the Aboveground gold stock study, is it shows that the amount of dollars have been all over the place. 1 year it grows at 26%. Another year shows that it declined 15%. You can't have consistent prices when the quantity of money is changing so rapidly. As I mentioned in the gold stock study, I related to what Milton Friedman calls the K rule. He says that money should always grow consistently year after year after year. And only in that way can you have consistent prices. So if you look at prices of goods and services, or in other words, perform economic calculation in terms of gold, you have this consistency over long periods of time. And in a capitalist society that the world is, and how humans interact with one another, it's important to be able to measure prices carefully and to deploy your capital carefully, because capital is a very, very precious resource. You don't want to be wasting it. But unfortunately, a lot of it does get wasted because central banks enable bubbles to be created, and these bubbles ultimately end up destroying a lot of capital that had been put into areas which should never have been put into, and probably wouldn't have been put into if people had been calculating prices of goods and services using gold as the measure rather than any national currency.
If I was a monetarist in the school of Milton Friedman, I would say, though, that I can just discipline myself in some way. Maybe we should just discipline central banks a bit better, because if we did, then they could just release new money in line with growth of population and so on, and then we wouldn't have to waste resources digging gold out of the ground in one place and then putting it into a hole in another place. So what features of gold make it so much better than paper fiat money?
Yeah, well, first of all, human nature doesn't change. And while we can talk about discipline, at the end of the day, human nature is always tempted to push things to the edge, and ultimately the discipline disappears. And that's doubly so if you get politicians involved in the monetary process, which is basically what we have everywhere in the world today. The discipline is basically all gone. That's why the U.S. budget deficits are horrendous, and why the U.S. national debt continues to grow. In fact, why the debt of all governments around the world continues to grow, because there's no discipline. Governments never cut back on spending, and if they have control of the money process, they basically run the printing process to give them the money they want to spend until ultimately the currency, is destroyed. So it's good in theory to talk about discipline, but the reality is it doesn't happen that way. But there's another important part. Why does gold grow at 1.8% per annum, year after year after year? It's because of the fortuitous way in which gold is dispersed in the Earth's crust. Because of technology, we humans continue to advance, and this is even true in terms of mining. 30 years ago, people would walk over dirt that, today is actually a gold mine, because the technology has enabled us to develop gold from land that previously was considered uneconomic. As technology grows and develops and advances, gold is becoming harder to find, but the way it's, again, dispersed in the Earth's crust very fortuitously, everything comes together so that gold continues to grow about 1.8% per annum, this above-ground gold stock. So we're producing more gold, the gold stock is getting bigger, but world population is also getting bigger. But this is another point that I've shown in the gold study. I've actually related the above-ground gold stock to world population and show the consistency of growth between the two. And as long as you have a consistency of growth between the number of people and the quantity of money, you're going to achieve Milton Friedman's objective. The problem is that people need the discipline. I actually discussed this point with Milton Friedman at a conference in New Orleans back in the mid-1990s. And my point was that, in a perfect world, we don't need policemen. Why do we pay policemen to, do what policemen do? But the reality is it's not a perfect world. And if you accept the fact that it's not a perfect world, politicians and central bankers make mistakes. After all, we're only human. So you need some kind of discipline to guide the monetary process. And there's no better discipline than gold, as proven by its 5,000-year history, which brings up another point. The fiat currencies that we're using today are only 41 years track record, since 1971. And we can see how badly that's going. So, it seems to me that inevitably we're going to go back to gold. Governments are going to go back kicking and screaming, or they're going to go back willingly. But one way or another, we're going to go back to gold. And my hope is that the study that the Gold Money Foundation has published will be helpful to people to understand why gold is an important part of human society, an important part of human civilization, and why ultimately we have to go back to gold as the world's international money, which is basically just resuming, after a 41-year hiatus, its traditional and rightful role. It's at the center of gold has always been at the center of global commerce, and I suspect it's going to remain at the center of global commerce once this craziness with fiat currencies eventually ends.
I think it's interesting that the forces of market supply and demand keep gold at the perfect price all the time. As it becomes cheaper to mine, we get more of it out of the ground, so therefore its price goes down and so on. But the problem with human psychology, as you say, is that when faced with a challenge, we're always going to press the Control P print button. So I think we're heading towards Detlef Schlichter's paper money collapse. So what do you think the mood is in the private offices of Western central banks as they watch the clouds of this paper money storm approach?
Well, I assume the Western central bankers have to be in a panic mode, and that's probably one reason why they're working even harder to try to keep the gold price from rising, because they realize that their world is falling apart, and probably in the not too distant future they're going to be without jobs. Another study that I did for the Gold Money Foundation, which is also available for free. If you go to goldmoneyfoundation.org, you can download it as well. I wrote it a number of years ago. And basically, it explains why gold is not the barbarous relic. In my view, the barbarous relic is central banking. And, central banking, as it's presently practiced, no longer has a role to play. It was helpful when it was first invented with the establishment of the Bank of England back in 1694, followed shortly thereafter by Sir Isaac Newton's invention of the gold standard, which kept monetary discipline well controlled. But by 1914, let me put it this way, and in 1914, a British pound had the same purchasing power that it did back in 1700. But after 1914, we've gone in the wrong direction. So we've had a whole century of misdirection. And as we approach the 100th anniversary of the Fed's birth, which will occur in 2014, I think not only is the dollar going to die, but I think the Federal Reserve is going to disappear, and hopefully other central banks will disappear too. And we'll go back to gold. And we'll go back to a monetary system in which, people control rather than governments control. Which brings up another point. In the 20th century, gold was taken out of the hands of the people by Lenin in Russia, Mussolini in Italy, Hitler in Germany, and Roosevelt in the United States. Now, why did they do it? They did it because they wanted to get the free market money out of the hands of the people to put more power in the hands of the state. And I think that we've seen the problems that happen when there's too much monetary power in the hands of the state. And hopefully we're going to go back the other way, where, once again, money will be a function of the free market and not a function of government dictate.
To bring it back into the free market, then, what we need to do is reveal how much gold these central banks actually have. Just to wrap up, as individuals, is there anything we can do to help encourage and persuade our governments to get central banks to carry out fair and true audits of the gold?
Well, as individuals, I don't think we should be focusing on what governments are going to do. We can try to educate politicians, but I think that's probably the wrong approach. I think what we need to do as individuals is make sure that we're educated, our friends and families are educated, and that we're prepared, for the future. I think that's probably a more valuable use of time rather than trying to convince politicians. The system is what it is. It's going to run its natural course. And I think that natural course is heading to a collapse of fiat currencies. So we as individuals basically have to prepare for that. And I always like to say that one of the best ways to prepare for it is to own sound money. Save gold, save silver by accumulating it, month after month after month. As this monetary turmoil that we've seen for the past 4 decades reaches its logical conclusion, which is likely to be a collapse of the US dollar and the other fiat currencies around the world.
Do you have a time frame for that at all?
Well, I've always felt it was going to be 2013 to 2015, and we're getting pretty close to that time frame now. And I'm still thinking that that's the time frame. I could be too early, but, to be honest, Andy, I'd rather be too early than too late.
Yeah, 13 is always an unlucky number for somebody. So, thank you for your time today, James Turk. And as we said a couple of times during the interview, all of these reports and studies are freely available at the Gold Money websites. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Andy.
Subscribe to the Gold Money newsletter at www.goldmoney.com to receive email updates on new articles, videos, and iTunes podcasts from our Gold Research section.